I request Ambassador Pascal Allen Nasrat to deliver this speech.
I can speak for about 45 minutes also. Professor Bians, Professor Davies, Vice Chancellor, Maurice Davies, Vice Chancellor Stephen Joseph, here, Anil Weiss, Ravinder Dillon, my two oldest friends here in Jaipur, and all you other distinguished invitees here this morning. I am very honored to have been invited to deliver this talk, as has been made quite clear already. All the earlier speakers were academicians. I am just a civil servant. So the honor is mine that I have been classed among all these world-class academicians and invited to deliver this lecture. I'd like to begin by congratulating the university on instituting this series of lectures. I think it's a very important contribution to Gandhian studies in this country. As I've gone around, I have seen Gandhi centers in many universities, most of them as dead as a doornail. In certain cases, the Gandhi centers are used to stock old room coolers and such other things. So it gives me great joy to see that here in Rajasthan, in Kota, that there is such an active Gandhi center. And it's not only that they organize these lectures, but as I hear great joy is that they have set up sort of Gandhi community centers in various parts of Rajasthan. This is really where we have to take the Gandhian message to the grassroots level. So I would like to warmly congratulate Professor Naresh Davies and the Vardhaman Mahavir University, Open University of Kota, for the really wonderful fundamental work which they are doing in this particular field. Maybe I should begin by telling you why in my old age I got involved with the Mahatma. If there is a single incident that I could trace it back to, it was really the bringing down of the Babri Masjid. I was greatly disturbed by that. As a young diplomat, and throughout our career, we had gone all around the world proudly declaring that religious tolerance was India's gift to the world. Ekam Sat Vipraha Bhavuta Vadan Udara Charitanam Vasudeva Kutumbakam. So in my country, to see a place of worship, maybe it was an archaeological monument, but it was a symbol of India's secularism brought down in open daylight. Later, terrible things happening on the first on the Sikh community, then on the Muslim community, then on the Christian community. I never imagined in my hometown of Mangalore that a nun would be raped or a priest would be stabbed or a church attacked. It was so shocking to me and so distressing. I said, I must do something. It seemed like a fool's dream. But an old aunt had told me when I was growing up, she's the one who brought me up because my father was a judge and was being transferred all over. We were left in Mangalore to study. And she had said, always remember, it's better to light one little candle than to curse the dark. So I therefore said, see what I can do. I just retired. And when I told my mother that I had decided to try to promote Gandhi, the woman almost collapsed. She thought I got a bit soft in the brain. But then when she found all the people I had brought together, in the first year, beginning with the former Chief Justice of India, Justice M.M. Venkatachalaya is our chairman. People like Soli Soraji, Mrinalini Sarabhai, Rajmohan Gandhi, people from every single community. The sister of the Queen of Spain, the great-grandson of Leo Tolstoy, all these are our trustees. She couldn't believe it. So she became the first contributor to Sarvodaya Trust. That's why my book is dedicated to her. Now, Rajmohan Gandhi, when I met him, he said, Alan Niles about you. It's a wonderful idea, but I have no time. So if you can devote your full time to it, you do it. Otherwise, don't start it, because starting something and then it collapses, it only becomes counterproductive. But he said, if we are going to start something, it must be something different. There are so many Gandhian organizations, so let it not even call it a Gandhian organization. So we decided to call it the Sarvodaya Trust, where it will be the all-round uplift of everyone. That we decided on the name. And he said the structure also must be such that since you are so focused on all the communal virus that is being poured in our body politic, we all want communal harmony. Let's think of something different. So we decided that if we were going to start something, we will bring people from all communities together. That's the basic structure. Our crest is an octagon, which represents the main religions of India and of the world. 4 of these religions born in this country. 4 came into this country fairly soon after its birth. Christianity came to India within 30 years of the crucifixion of Jesus Christ. But at the heart of this crest is the Dharma Chakra, which represents the moral essence of all religions, which is the same. That you spin the wheel in the direction of good works, good will come to you. If you spin it in the opposite direction, well, only evil can come out. So we launched this. Today we have 10 chapters all over the country. We don't have a single paid employee. It's all voluntary work from all different communities. They're working together. I was suddenly bright hope of the horizon, thanks to this learned professor. I don't know where he was hiding all this time, how he escaped my notice. But I am very grateful that he contacted me, and hopefully before I leave, we would have laid the foundation for that. Now let me come to my lecture. I've given it my favorite title, Gandhi, the Non-Violent Revolutionary. He is a revolutionary. And he has made more revolutions than people are aware of. And one needs to know also the scenario in which he functioned, because that will bring out the magnitude of the revolutions that he made. Now, I'll just read out the following things to you. Reviewing historic developments in Asia in the first half of the 20th century, the eminent civilizational historian Will Durant wrote, China followed Sun Yat-sen, took up the sword and fell into the arms of Japan. India, weaponless, accepted as a leader one of the strangest figures in history and gave to the world the unprecedented phenomena of a revolution led by a saint and waged without a gun. To accurately assess Gandhi's role as a non-violent revolutionary, one needs to recall the national and international scenario in which he operated. The latter has been well described by Gene Sharp. Gandhi was the contemporary of Tsar Nicholas, Lenin and Stalin, Kaiser Wilhelm and Adolf Hitler, Woodrow Wilson and Franklin Roosevelt, of the last emperor of China, Sun Yat-sen, Chiang Kai-shek and Mao Zedong. He bridged the span between the time when wars were fought with rifles to the time when they were fought with atom bombs. That is the span that what this man discovered. Racism ran rampant. Women, untouchables, and many others were denied dignity and opportunities. These were among the social and political evils for which Gandhi sought solutions. In India, this is the scenario now in India, nationalists rose with strong revolutionary fervor. Their father figure was Bankim Chandra Chatterjee, the Bengali novelist, whose popular novel Anand Math had become the handbook of secret societies, and his hero Satyanand the model for revolutionaries. Cambridge-educated Aurobindo Ghosh, selected for the coveted Indian civil service, gave it up to join the radical nationalists and wrote Bhavani Mandir. It was a stirring call to India's youth to sacrifice themselves in Goddess Kali's name for Mother India's dignity and salvation. Vartaman Rananiti, Modern Art of War, published in 1907, propagated Bakunin's idea that in creating an equitable society, destruction was inescapable. Several British officials were assassinated in India and in England between 1905 and 1915. Viceroy Lord Hardinge, attacked while on a ceremonial procession in December 1912, little before Christmas, narrowly escaped assassination. At the 1919 Amritsar Congress, when Gandhi spoke about truth and non-violence, senior nationalist leader Bal Gangadhar Tilak brusquely retorted, "My friend, truth has no place in politics." 2 decades later, another important leader, Subhash Chandra Bose, Congress president in 1938, openly disagreed with Gandhi's non-violent strategy and secretly left India for Germany and Japan. With the latter's collaboration, he set up the Indian National Army with troops captured by the Japanese in Southeast Asia and marched in their train towards India. The slogan was, "Give me blood and I will give you freedom, and I promise you freedom." As Rajmohan Gandhi has pointed out, it was an offer of freedom with the gun and the boots, as against Gandhi's charka and wooden sandals. He has also pointed out that the violence of the militants was not the only challenge that Gandhi faced. The outcasts were nervous about power moving from British to caste Hindu hands. India's princes were suspicious of their subjects and of Congress intentions. Owners of agricultural lands were suspicious of absentee landlords and tillers, and if there were small cultivators, fearful of losing their holdings. To town-based creditors, communities coveting army or police jobs felt threatened by one another. For protection against rivals or adversaries, each group, communal, caste or class, inclined towards the Raj, thereby strengthening its hegemony, even while disliking its burden and alien nature. Uniting Indians for dislodging the Raj was a large and difficult project. All this is a quotation from Rajmohan Gandhi. Now, Gandhi succeeded in getting the Indian National Congress and the Indian people to adopt his non-violent strategy for national liberation only because of his total identification with the poverty-stricken Indian people, his high moral stature, innovative communication, management and strategizing skills, and the impressive results its non-violent struggle produced 1920 onwards. Gandhi had innovated his satyagraha, firmly adhering to truth, non-violent strategy in South Africa, and first used it on November 11, 1906. So 9/11, that's all we all know today, is not the first 9/11. There was a 9/11 almost a century earlier. The Satyagraha strategy was an important innovation, since truth and non-violence had never been combined before as two sides of the same strategy. Its theoretical essence is that humans, having been created in the image of God and imbued with the divine spark, must be led by truth and love, not by fear and hate. One has to live and, if necessary, to die for truth, but never to hate, never to hurt or hate anyone. For Gandhi, Satyagraha denotes the living law of life. These are Gandhi's words. Satyagraha connotes the living law of life. The law will work just as the law of gravitation will work, whether we accept it or not. And just as scientists will work wonders out of various applications of the laws of nature, even so a man who applies the law of love with scientific precision can work greater wonders. The modus operandi of the strategy is a remarkable combination of the messages of Lord Krishna and Jesus Christ. What is the message of Lord Krishna? Simple one, that when you are confronted with evil and injustice, you just have no option. Even if the evil and injustice that you see is located in your own family or your own brother, you still have no option. Your duty is to stand up and confront it. That is one aspect of the Gandhian strategy. But on the other hand, Christ also comes in. He is recorded in his Bible that Gandhi began with a prejudice against Christianity, because when he grew up, he used to see all these British missionaries standing at every lamp pole and saying very terrible things about Hindus, idol worshippers, something. So he began with a prejudice against Christianity. He went to England and he met in his vegetarian society, etc. He met Christian friends, theosophists and others, from whom incidentally for the first time he learned about Bhagavad Gita. He writes this to his great embarrassment. Of course, family was very religious, they went to the temple, observed all the feasts. But there was no reading of sacred books and stuff. So it was in London for the first time that he has discovered the Bhagavad Gita, which then becomes his encyclopedia, as he calls it, of daily reference. This was the book which he always carried with him, from which he drew, made an inspiration. But then he also was introduced to the Bible. He said the Old Testament put him off, it repulsed him. But the New Testament, which was the life of Christ and the Sermon on the Mount, somehow rather gripped him. And so you have an important element of Christ in Gandhi. And what is this element? It is through self-suffering that redemption will come. The crucifixion is very important. And that's why when he comes back on his way back from the Round Table Conference, he has stopped in Rome, gone and visited the Sistine Chapel, and he sees a great crucifixion over there, or a painting of the crucifixion. And this is what he has written. What would I not have given to be able to bow my head before the living image of Christ crucified? I saw there at once that nations, like individuals, could only be made through the agony of the cross.